once interviewed him in the bath. I go up to the ground and his secretary says, "Oh, see you now. He's in his office." So I tap the door. "Come in, son." So I come in. What? He's sitting there in a big metal bath. I mean, it's funny. My dad was a printer in a newspaper, and two things he hated more than anything were journalists and football. So I don't know whether I was rebelling against him or not. But and this arm extends in a green top, and a finger signals to him to come over. And Owen and his dad went rushing to the guy who'd signalled. And I managed to manoeuvre myself. It's Brian Clough.
So hello and welcome to the Sports News Blitz podcast, and it is our 10th episode today. It's a bit of a milestone for us here, the first of many milestones, I like to think. Of course, I'm joined by Sam, and as always, say hello, Sam.
It's good to be back. It's definitely been a while, but I'm happy to be back here and not doing uni work for once, so that's always nice.
I know, uni work's kind of come to a close for us now, and for our 10th episode, we needed a guest which was going to meet that expectation and show us that we are a podcast not to be messed with. So, introducing the very brilliant, the fantastic, it's Alan Nixon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure, guys. Absolute pleasure.
So, to start with, what we'll do, we'll speak to you a little bit about you personally, but we want to get to know you a little bit on quite a fun question that we tend to ask everybody so far. Well, for the first 10, I think we're going to change it up going forward, but for now, we'll stick with it. So, in terms of you go to a lot of grounds, you've been to a lot of match days, all that jazz. We would like to know where you found the best food, whether that be in terms of as a media or as a fan, where have you found the best food? We've had a range of different answers.
Well, you won't beat a Partick thistle pie. I'm sorry. It's an impossibility. It's not just a food, it's a potential missile, as I used to do in my teenage tearaway years. The thistle pie was a thing of beauty. But I've got to say now, as a media hack who sells his soul, the best food is Manchester City. It's absolutely outstanding. It really is. I mean, it's a terrific club. I know they've got all the charges, etc. But I tell you what, as an experience for fans and media, both, it's a great place. What they've done for that city is quite remarkable.
Yeah, we've had, I think, was it Emily who said Manchester City as well? Although, in fairness, she is a Manchester City fan, so I think she was quite biased.
But oh no, seriously, the steak and pepper pie. I mean, find an excuse.
I was gonna say, I agree. Oh. I went deathly hungover with my dad to have Man City, and we got food there, and it was sorted me right out before we got battered. So that was a good start to the day, at least.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's another point to Man City. We need to start a leaderboard of this, I think. So we'll move into some media-related questions and what we're here to talk about. So with your X account and online, you seem to have your finger on the pulse of pretty much every professional league that there is, from like League Two to the Premier League. You always seem to be in the know. How do you get to that point? How do you have so much information on so many different leagues?
I think I've always respected every level of the game. Clubs at the bottom should be taken seriously. They don't get the coverage that they probably get in the national newspapers these days because it's all just about the big boys. So I've always taken an interest in the smaller clubs. I supported a smaller club, and I've always had a feel for the underdog. And when I was at my peak before I'm in the sad state I'm in now, I used to go to a lot of games at that level. I used to go to reserve games and youth team games, etc. And you find, which I've always found in football, you find if you treat people with respect, you get it back, and you won't get any better people than at the bottom end of the game because they actually do it for the love rather than the money. I mean, when I was working in Plymouth, just about the start of my career, I covered the local non-league scene, and you wouldn't know there was a non-league scene unless you were down in Devon and Cornwall. But it was such a fantastic experience. It taught you so many things. One of the great things it taught me, football's just really a village. It's full of gossips. And if you want to know what's happening with a club, go and ask their neighbour, because they'll know and they'll tell you everything. And it's applied down the years in many cases that people will always know within football not just what's happening in our own place, but what's happening next door, and I'd be quite happy to tell you.
For someone who's, I was just want to know, just for someone who's been in the game for so long, there's been a lot of changes over the last few years in football. A lot of money coming into the game, a lot of technology coming into the game. I just want to know, in your opinion, do you think it's changed for the better recently or less so? Because there's a lot of coverage on the Premier League, but all throughout the leagues, through every league. Do you think it's changing for the better? Or
it's not the game I fell in love with. It's a different thing, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, because football needed to be dragged out of the dark ages. You know, there were things at football matches in the 70s and 80s that really shouldn't have been tolerated at every level. In terms of the clubs themselves, I liked it more when you had a relationship with people, whereas now you're a little bit distant. And there's guys I talk to and deal with now that I knew 30, 40 years ago are still friends. I don't think anybody starting now in the game would find it as easy or straightforward to form that kind of relationship and get to know a player, get to know a coach, get to know a manager, get to know a club official who can trust you, because barriers have been put up and it's all got very serious. And I don't want to sound xenophobic. There's that many different languages about now. You can't get close to people who are basically just passing through from other countries. They're going to come over here, do well, improve the game, no doubt about it, but then they'll leave. Whereas the people that you really turn to in football after 30 or 40 years of working are the guys who were always there and who know what the game's like and who know people and are constants. And that helps you a lot. Whereas if MD is very friendly with Pep Guardiola, in 10 years from now, he's probably not going to be here. It's not going to be much use to you, is it? Whereas if you know somebody you maybe grew up with, you can still talk to them now if they're still in the game. Fantastic. So yeah, subtle things like that can have changed. But you know, I look back and we all get misty-eyed about some of the football that was around before, some of the great Liverpool teams, the great Celtic teams, things like that. And they will stand the test of time. But then again, you look at it, you look at the state of the terraces, you look at the state of the pitches, you look at the state of the coverage, you know, and it is better now. There's no doubt about it. But it might not be as likeable. That would be the word I'd use.
Would there be anything you'd want to bring back if you could from the past? If there's one thing, maybe.
That's a great question. Well, that really is there's a few. Probably great Scottish footballers would be one. Because if you think about it, I fell in love with watching Jimmy Johnson and Dennis Law, and there's nothing like that about. You know, I'd love to see more individuals. That's probably the best way of putting it, without being too personal about it. I'd love to see more individuals in the game. It strikes me now that's a little bit overcoached, and it's all about the manager and what the manager's greatest idea is, and he's trying to turn all the players into little robots running around, which is interesting. But I'd rather know about the players and their ability. You find so few mavericks these days, and when we do, I don't think the coaches know quite how to cope with them. If it's somebody who's a bit different. You watch under 21 football and youth football and all the guys coming through, and they're all being taught a certain way. Everybody's going to be a midfield player these days. That's why we don't have any strikers anymore. We're all trying to be midfield players and creative and pass and look nice. You miss somebody that's a crazy winger, Jimmy Johnston, you know, somebody like that. I mean, that got you off your seat when you're a kid. You thought, oh, I want to do that. I want to be that. Isn't that exciting? And I think that's been taken out of the game, which is a shame. Look, there's some fantastic footballers about, but they're probably team players in the main rather than magnificent individuals.
That's a brilliant answer.
Yes, thank you. You touched on something there, which an old friend of mine, Richard Smith, who works down in Nottingham, he told me a story which was quite similar in terms of not having that relationship with the coaches and the players. He used to have an incredibly close relationship with Neil Warnock when he was manager at Notts County, to the point where he'd just be able to walk into the office. He'd go to the training sessions. Like, I remember he told me once he joined in with cricket with the entire team because they were a man down. Was there anybody in terms of like coaches or players who had that real special connection with for you?
Well, I've got a few friends that are still friends who I've got on with, but Owen Coyle was a particular friend who I've known for years, since he was a skinny kid playing in the reserve team. just a fantastic fella, just a good human being. So I've always had a very close relationship with Owen because of that. But even the guys you didn't get on with, you could have a great sparring contest with them. If you went into the training ground, you'd go in for a preview, and Fergie would be snapping and snarling and things like that. But it was fun. You go into Joe Royle's press conferences, Joe wouldn't be content with giving you any team news. He just want to have a joke. He just want to crack a gag. And it'd be the guy who could come out with the best one-liner would leave the press conference thinking they've done well. Then you look at your notebook and realise, wait a minute, he didn't actually say anything. It was just a series of jokes. So you miss all that kind of stuff. Fergie's the problem there, because Fergie realised that the press were far too close to the players and had massive access at Manchester United. And he wanted to stop that because he had this generation of young players and he wanted to control them and make sure they didn't talk to the press. So he brought the shutters down. And because he was so good at it and successful with it, a lot of the other clubs copied him and said, well, that's the way we'll behave. We'll cut the press out. And so the days of going along the training ground, and you spend an hour there. You talk to players, Some would want to knock your head off. I won't name one. But one in particular wanted to fill me in once because I'd not been too kind about him. But it's all part of it. It's human. And you have your favourites and you have those you don't like. And that's all part of it. And that's gone because now you go into a sterile training ground somewhere, nobody sits down, and it's all deadly serious, one question, and then move on to somebody else. You get no feel. You've got no idea what the guys actually like. Now, it might not be important what they're like and what they're like away from the place, but I don't know. I'd rather know them as human beings. I mean, Fergie's a fascinating character with so many different facets to him. But I'd rather know about that than about somebody who might be the latest hotshot who's tremendous in his computer and can tell you about this system, that system, and the other. It doesn't excite me quite at the same level.
Do you have any managers or players you could name drop like nowadays that you've met recently that maybe surprised you and how they came across? Because people like Ange Postecoglou, they still come across as quite a character, a nice guy, down to earth. I was wondering if you had anyone that came to mind.
I really like Scott Parker at Burnley. I think he's a proper individual. People say he's a bit dull, the football he plays. It's not. If you look at the football he plays, it's very thoughtful. It's very organised. He was like that as a player. He was tidy. Everything was right. Everything was proper. Even his hair was in place. The way he dresses himself tells you what he's like. He's got an astute mind, and he's got a bit of pride about him. And I've got a lot of time for him. And he's one of those, if you talk to him and you ask a sensible question, you'll get a sensible answer, rather than trying to come up with some sort of agenda or whatever. I've got a lot of time for him. I think if he does all right at Burnley this year, that he'll be a Premier League manager, maybe even an England manager in the future. I just think I like the cut of his jib. And from the outside, you might not know what he's like, but he's a football man, and there's a lot to be said for him. I hope he does well.
Yeah, no, I think Burnley's kind of that second opportunity for him to really show what he's about as a coach.
Well, people run down what he did at Fulham and Bournemouth, but he got them promoted, right? All right, it turned a little bit sour after that, but unless you're a very top manager in the Premier League, it will turn sour on you because there's so many. There's more failures than successes, and people can't cope with failure anymore. Fans used to go to games and support their team through thick and thin. Now, if you're not winning a couple of games, they feel the need to slaughter you on Twitter or there was a time when people wrote letters to newspapers and took the time to think about it and actually wrote something down and put a stamp on a letter. That kind of process meant you taking a bit of time to think about it. Now, after a game on a Saturday night, if your team's lost, all you see is calling for a manager's head and this, that, and that's the other. Football's different shades. You lose, right? Get over it. Swallow it. There's always next week. But everybody, particularly the Premier League's a terrible place. Everybody thinks they should succeed. Well, you're not going to succeed. Sometimes be happy with your lot. You're actually in the Premier League. And I'm not being condescending. But a lot of these teams, they're only ever going to be, for want of a better word, also rans, but they're in a tremendous league, making fortunes. You're watching a decent quality of football. Accept it. I'd love to watch a team. My team was in the Premier League. I'd be overjoyed. That'd be great. But yet there's so many disillusioned people and there's so many platforms to express that disappointment that creates an atmosphere, and it's toxic. You mentioned that Postecoglou. Look at him now. This is a guy who's been around the world. He went into Celtic and he turned around Celtic when they were in a right bad way. And now he comes down to Tottenham. He loses a few players through injury and he's getting castigated everywhere he goes. Well, when were Tottenham ever anything? And is this why? Because the fans are always on top of him and never giving him a chance? I don't get it. Don't get it. I would never turn on a team like that. I have written letters to managers in the past when I was a child saying, oh, you're doing this wrong and doing that wrong and all the rest of it. Different thing, but I would never boo my team during a game or after it. I just think that's incredibly disloyal.
Yeah, no, and it has become a bit of a theme, hasn't it, to call for the manager as soon as things turn or even look like they're going to turn sour. It's always the manager, and it's always he's got to go. Where realistically, that's not the way forward.
Take a breath, take a breath. But there is a short-term attitude. You will lose games, so don't get too down about it. Take something from it and move on. But the amount of the casualties, it's crazy, that kind of stuff. I mean, some clubs just do not know how to lose and don't know how to accept it, and it's a bit alarming.
Do you think it's something to do with new fans coming on very quickly, watching and not really understanding how to lose? I don't know where it will come from, but there just seems to be a bit of a disillusion about not really understanding how much, like what their club actually is entitled to and not entitled to.
Yeah, well, I think social media has caused that because it does give people a platform to sound off. I mean, I've done it occasionally myself. I've been furious at the occasional thing, and it's particularly when I'm watching Scotland, I'll come out and say something I might regret the day after. But I think you've got to bite your tongue and don't feel the need to say something dafter than your mate. Somebody says, oh, this is rubbish. Oh, I've got to say it's even more rubbish. I'll tell you why it's rubbish. And it starts spinning out of control. And it doesn't help. It doesn't. I mean, as I say, there's 20 teams in the Premier League. 4 will make the Champions League, which I would regard as being a successful season. Maybe 1 will win a cup. No matter how you add that up, more have failed than have succeeded. So just, sometimes accept it's not actually failure. You're actually in that group and you've done extremely well. Look, if you're bottom of the 3rd division and you should be much better, then you'd be entitled for a bit of a scream and feel sorry for yourself. But the rest of the time, just okay, chill out a little bit.
For you personally, this doesn't have to be the biggest, but which for you has been the most exciting story you've had the opportunity to break or to be involved in?
I'd have to say probably the most exciting time was when Jack Walker came into Blackburn Rovers a way back, because nobody believed what was going to happen. I mean, I knew what was possibly going to happen because I knew how rich this guy was. But to persuade the newspaper I was with at the time in particular, look, this is happening. This guy's going to come in and he's going to turn football on its head at a time when everybody was skint, remember. There was no TV deals chucking millions about. And they couldn't get their heads around it. Blackburn Rovers, Milltown, cobblestone streets. What are you talking about? I remember the day I got the story that they'd bid for Gary Lineker, and the paper was laughing. I said, what are you laughing about? They're never going to get Gary Lineker. I says, they made an offer for Spurs. The offer's in. I've stood it up. I know it's in. And I had to spend about 2 or 3 hours persuading them to use the story. How ridiculous is that? They put it on the back, and it was obviously confirmed the next day. Now, Lineker got a bit upset and his agent thought it was a wind-up. No, it wasn't. Spurs got a little bit upset. And I remember the Blackburn chairman at the time, Bill Fox, going on to Spurs, and he relayed the message to me. He said, well, if Spurs don't like us buying Lineker, maybe we'll go and buy Spurs, because they were in a position. Jack Walker could have gone and bought Spurs in a heartbeat. Never mind your best player, just go and buy Spurs. Why not? And all the stories around about that team were all great, like going for Dalglish and all the players they brought in and all the rest of it. It was just such a fascinating story for a club that didn't see it coming, and in many ways wasn't really capable of handling this turnaround, because everybody was just going, what's happening here? The poor old chairman, Bill Fox, a lovely, lovely man. I'm afraid he was worried into his grave. by the pressure he got from above to deliver all that Jack Walker wanted. Because Jack thought, well, I've got all this money. That means automatically we sign the best players and we get the best manager. It takes an awful lot of work to do that. So for that extended 2 or 3 years, before he actually cracked it and won the league, I loved that period because every time they lost, they would go and buy a player. And any time the paper was short of a story, could you give us a Blackburn money story? Suddenly they wanted Blackburn stories. What's the bonuses? Well, what's this? Who's getting paid, etc., etc. And it was great because I got an awful lot of access to information there at the time, and it was a magic period. It was fun. There's been an awful lot of other stories that happen, daft stories that happen, and big stories that happen. In fact, to me, the best stories are the stories behind the stories. You know, the background to the story. I have actually written a book. I'll never publish it because I'd get sued. But I've written it for my kids so that they'll know what I was doing when I wasn't talking to them when they were growing up. It was the stories behind the stories are the best. I mean, they're fantastic. Some of the things that happen, some of the things you would never think when you start that you'd get involved in. You know, setting up the occasional transfer, maybe even a British record one, managerial appointments, and possibly the proudest moment was getting a player in the Scotland team who scored in the World Cup final. I mean, I think that will go down, and I might get that one on my gravestone. He assisted in the Scotland World Cup win.
That is legendary, that. I was wondering, obviously, you just mentioned there's bits and bobs you can't mention, but I was wondering if you've got any funny stories or anything like that about when you find out about a story, or how you found out about a story.
Well, I always think the funniest one was one night I went to see a mate of mine play for Darlington at Northwich Victoria in a non-league game. And I got there early because I didn't know where Northwich was. So I was there about an hour and a half before the game. I picked up my ticket, and I don't know if you know or if you knew what Northwich's ground was like. It's changed since. They've got a pub in there called the Volunteer just beside the stadium. So I thought, well, I've got an hour to kill. And I don't drink before games. I would never dream of drinking before a football match. But I wasn't working that night, so I thought, I'll go in for a pint. So I'm sitting down having a pint. And there's this player in the corner, and I thought, that's Ian Woan. I've just written a story about him. At Runcorn, he might be going into the Football League. So what's he doing here in the pub on a Monday night? And then the door opens, and I'm sitting between the door and Ian Woan, and this arm extends in a green top, and a finger signals to him to come over. And Woan and his dad went rushing to the guy who'd signalled. And I managed to manoeuvre myself. It's Brian Clough. Brian Clough signed Ian Woan in a pub. I mean, it was just, you could not make it up. There was no reason for me to be there. By chance, I'm there when this signing happens. So I tell the paper, and the paper's, oh, you're joking with Brian Clough signs a player in the pub? Fantastic. Just one of those that drops out in your lap. You know, you could spend hours on the phone chasing stories that don't get anywhere. And you go out for a pint and you bump into Brian Clough. It doesn't get any better than that.
That sounds like a true moment of like, you feel like I am meant to be doing this. I am meant to be like.
It's like falling out a block of flats and landing on a trampoline, isn't it? Literally. You know, how did that happen?
That's brilliant.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's up there as one of my favourite stories we've had so far. That's great. And Brian Clough, did you have a relationship with Brian Clough? Because I feel like he's such an interesting character.
Brian was very close. When I was in the Sunday Mirror in the early 80s, and Brian was very close to one of the main writers called Vince Wilson, who was a fantastic operator. And Vince had written Brian's book. And just to sort of sidetrack a little bit, Brian was so pleased about that he, rather than take the money himself from the book, he paid off Vince's mortgage. And that was the type of guy Brian Clough was. I mean, but Clough was just a complete and utter one-off. Anyway, because of that relationship between Brian and the paper, I thought, I'm going to chance my arm. Celtic are playing Nottingham Forest. I'm going to phone him up and ask for a preview. Phoned about 4 times. No answer. You always had to go through the secretary. I think it was about the 5th time. She said, oh, he's ready for you now. I thought, I'm going to be speaking to Brian Clough. So I get through to Clough. Yes. I said, look, Mr. Clough, I've always been a fan of yours. I'm doing a preview of the Celtic game and all the Scots in your team. Could you possibly just give me a little brief view of all of your Scots? Oh, and he immediately reeled off this fantastic 20-minute chat about all the players, how he'd found them, what they were like, good lads, bad lads, what was good about them, what was. This is unbelievable. From nothing, I've got this fantastic preview of all the Scottish boys that are going to come up and play for Forest against Celtic. This is unreal. So Forest get by Celtic. No, sorry, Forest win the first game, and the second game's on. And I thought, I'm going to try it again. I'm going to try and get through to him again. So I got, and this time I got through first time. I thought, wow, I've got a new best friend. So we're talking away. And I said to him, between you and me, and it, young man, there is no you and me. And the phone goes down. It's the best ever put down I've had in football. I couldn't help but laugh. I thought, what a magnificent one-liner. That's in other words, you've just been put in your place. You're getting far too uppity. Bang, shut up. What a fantastic payoff that was. I never spoke to him once after that. I had no need to, but I just thought, well, if you're going to get a slap in the face of one of these guys, you're not going to get a better one than that.
Not to bring it full circle, but I feel like those two stories perfectly encapsulate what you were saying earlier about, do you think football's changed for the better of the worse? Because that would never happen nowadays, would it?
No. You never get through. I mean, to go back to Fergie and his late lamented secretary, Kath, has just passed away. You know, you could get Fergie on the phone. And at Liverpool, you could phone the Liverpool training ground and players would answer the phone. And you could talk to the players. What? It just doesn't happen anymore. It's all got to be organised. Got to go through the press office. Oh, you've got to check with his agent. And they're all frightened to talk. And the funny thing is, I think you'll find if you actually do get to a player, they will talk because they quite like the attention. They like the media coverage. And if you treat them right, you'll get it back. There's one or two lads now I'll still deal with like that. I won't say who they are. But you can talk to. And if you treat them right, as I say, it's a basic thing. If you respect somebody, you'll get it back. And if you treat them properly, they'll treat you properly. It's not that hard, but there's so many barriers and so many restrictions that you can't really get close to that. And that's a shame. That is a shame because you miss it. And the partner's good. The off-the-record stuff can be great at times when you get a chat with a player and maybe we start talking about things you shouldn't be talking about and you find out all sorts of stuff. But that doesn't happen as much. I mean, I've got to say, I don't want to sound nostalgic, but around about the mid-'80s when I was with the Sunday Mirror, there was a lot of the players would go out in Glasgow on a Thursday night. They would be training on a Thursday. A lot of them would get their pay packets on a Thursday and they would just go out on a Thursday. It was the last night before curfew when they would go out and basically get leather. And because I knew a couple of them, I'd get in the company. So you'd go out on a Thursday night. You might not have anything to write about on the Sunday, but at the end of that Thursday night, you could have written about 5 newspapers and some of the things you were told. It's great, and I would love for that to still exist, but it doesn't. It's gone. That's completely changed, and that's a case of being born at the right time. I was at the right age to mix with guys with similar views on football and life, who were willing to go out and have a good evening on the Thursday, and it was all I could do. I mean, I remember the only problem was you had to try to remember it the next day, all the stuff you were told. Did he really say that? And your paper was full on a Sunday morning.
I've been out a few times in Glasgow. I can only imagine what nights out with professional footballers would be like. Sucky Street's an absolute mess. Forgive my pronunciation.
I won't name the names, but there were quite a few celebrity names around about that time. There was an awful lot. But you know what? They were actually away from football. They were great lads, and a lot of the lads at the time. Again, it sounds like nostalgia, but they did come from very ordinary working class backgrounds. They were all aspirational. They all wanted to be better, get big moves. Can you get us a move down there, etc., etc. And good people.
Moving back to sort of the media a little bit, I loved that tangent, by the way. That was fantastic. Reliable contacts for you are obviously like a huge source of information. How do you get to the point where you've built up such a good contact book? Is it just experience and, like you've said, respecting people who then respect you, or is there a bit more to it?
No, I think it's as basic as that. That if you deal with people and you deal properly, and if you can help them, it's not so easy to help them these days. But if you can help them in some way, you're in a very privileged position. You can. When I was a Scot working in England, the Scottish managers and players all wanted to talk to me about England, and English managers and English players wanted to talk to me about Scotland. It was more often Scots want to come to England, I must say. And if that meant you could join a few wires and exchange a few telephone numbers, set up the odd meeting for someone, brilliant. Nobody got hurt, and that is the way it used to be. I mean, journalists have done it, or certainly not now, but in the past, journalists would set things up because they could be a middleman. You wouldn't get anything for it apart from a story, or in some cases, you'd set the thing up and you wouldn't even get the story. But that's another matter. And so you were part of it. You were part of that particular scene, and people know that. The word goes round. I once did a story about a player who wanted a new contract at his club, and the club were very unhappy that it was written. But I stood by the story and I stood by the player, and eventually did get a contract. And within a matter of weeks and months, I was getting phone calls from guys I didn't know in that same dressing room saying, "Can you do the same for me?" And that's how it works. That's how it is, a back scratching exercise, and so be it. That's how it was. But you won't get that now because there's agents. I mean, most players until 20, 30 years ago, most players didn't have agents. There was no money to be made for the agent. Therefore, there was no agent. So it would quite often fall to a reporter to maybe say, "Look, there's a manager I know who likes you. Would you be interested in going? What's in it for you, blah, 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 blah." And you're away. The guy's got to move. Brilliant. Couldn't be happier.
What would happen? So when the club's unhappy with you, would they just be ringing you and email you just complaining, or would they do anything else?
Well, again, that was back in the day where you would phone someone up and at least you get a phone call. You wouldn't get an intermediary telling you, "Oh, you're banned." The particular player I'm talking about here played for Rangers in Scotland, obviously the biggest club apart. Well, Rangers and Celtic are the same size, aren't they? And it was a Rangers player who it was Davy Cooper, sadly gone, and it was about his contract. And I phoned regular phone call to Jock Wallace, the Rangers manager, next week. And I've never had frostbite on the phone before, but I got it that day. "Where'd you get the story, son?" I said, I can't tell you that." "Davey doesn't talk to the press." I said, "Yeah." "Well, where'd you get the story from?" I said, "I'm happy with the story." I said, "Look, and as you know, it's right." I said, "It's just the way of it. It's it's not really your problem. It's the club's problem." And he said, "Aye, okay, but don't phone me again." And that was a bit of a shame because Jock was actually a very nice guy who I'd been out with a couple of times, and we'd shared a background a little bit because we'd both worked in England and then gone back to Scotland. And he was a nice big fella. He wasn't the big bully that people thought he was. He was actually a very warm big guy, but because of the Cooper story, that was it. He wouldn't talk to me. But as I say, I had a string of Rangers stories after that from other Rangers players who couldn't believe that Davy Cooper had broken down the barrier and got a big contract.
That's really interesting. Thank you very much for telling us all that. That kind of brings us to the end of this part, and we're going to try something completely new that we haven't done before, which is going to be a little bit of a quiz for our guest, Alan. Now, your kind of specialty in my eyes is transfers and
Yes.
The movement of players, so that's what we're going to focus on. Alan, you get to answer first, then Sam, and then we'll swap it each time. Who was the most expensive transfer in the summer of 2024?
I mean,
that is some question. That's ridiculous. It's the last window, and I'm trying to think of it.
my brain's gone absolutely blank.
There is some more difficult ones.
Oh God!
No, do you know what? I could probably tell you 1974 ahead of 2020. The biggest signing of the summer.
Do you want a clue?
Yeah, desperately.
He moved from Manchester City.
Oh, okay, I've got it. I think.
Last summer.
I'm going to have to push you for an answer.
I'm going to have to pass. I've missed that completely. You've done me.
Okay, Sam, do you want to come in for the point?
I mean, I'm acting that confident. I think, is it Julian Alvarez?
It is Julian Alvarez.
I would never have said that.
It's quite a low-key name, to be fair. So
What was the official value put on him?
He went for 64.4 million, I believe, plus add-ons.
Well, that's probably why I was struggling, because I couldn't think of any really major ones last summer.
It was quite a summer, wasn't it?
I'd actually forgotten about that. That size of fee. But great question. I mean, 0-0.
Right, Sam, question 2. You get the first go this time. This is a bit more difficult, if I'm honest.
I struggled enough with the last one.
Cheers.
I'm going to butcher her name, and I feel really bad. But Rachel Kundananji is the most expensive female transfer ever, with a fee of €805,000. Do you know which club she moved to? She moved from Madrid CFF. Do you know where she moved to?
No, but I'll guess, because I have no idea. I'll guess. I think of like the big players in women's football. I would say Lyon.
Lyon is incorrect, unfortunately. Alan, can you swoop in for the point?
It's a long time since I got a women's transfer story, I'll tell you. I would have said Lyon too. I don't know which clubs are the big spenders in the women's game, so I would have to say pass.
Okay, we're passing again. It was Madrid CFF to Bay FC. Which
I've never heard of that.
I didn't know this one either, but hey, here we go.
Good
work. Say the question.
Send me regards to the researcher.
The questions don't increase in hardness as they go along, do they?
No, they don't.
Okay, this has got all the makings of a goalless draw.
Hey, I've got 1 point so far.
Question 3, Alan, comes to you. According to the website Transfer Market, who is the most expensive player transfer ever?
I think it's between two in my head, but I'm not 100% sure which one of them two it is.
Again, I can give a clue if needs be.
I think you're going to have to.
He moved to Barcelona for €135 million, reportedly.
Did he actually pay? Did he actually pay it? Dembele would sort of ring a little bit of a belly about that. I can't imagine it. Was it that much?
It's not Dembele.
No.
Are you sure this is right? But I was going to say Coutinho.
That's the answer I've got written down. Yes.
Yeah.
134.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money for someone who didn't really play that much at Barcelona.
I must admit, I would wonder about that. I don't know if that includes VAT contracts and whatever. There's no way in the world that amount of money was paid, was it?
I don't want to argue with the ref. I would never argue with the ref. But did Mbappe not move to Monaco for more than that, or did Neymar not move to PSG for more than that? But again,
the trouble is with foreign transfers. There's so many elements in them. That you're never quite sure what's the fee, what's the agent's fee, what's the sell on, Anyway, that's a
transfer market.
Yes.
Transfer market. Coutinho was a fantastic shout, Sam.
Well done. Yeah, well done. Up against it.
Alan, you need to bring this back in the next.
I need this badly, or the manager's going to be sacked.
However, it does flick over to Sam for the first guess. Lucy Bronze moved from Barcelona to which Women's Super League team this summer on a free transfer?
Sadly, I do know this one. It's Chelsea.
It is Chelsea. Alan,
I said that way too confidently.
Even I knew that.
They vary in difficulty, these questions. They vary in difficulty.
It's fine.
And then, Sam, you're going to know this one, I know. However, and Alan, this is a personal one for me. Seamus Coleman famously moved to Everton for which transfer fee?
It was absolutely minimal. I think Moisey talked him down to about 30 grand.
I had the figure at 60 grand.
I wouldn't argue with that. I mean, again, it could have been an upfront figure plus extras, but I remember Moisey was extremely tight over that one. It was something minimal.
30 grand is a banging deal for him, isn't it?
£60,000 is unbelievable for one of the better right backs of the Premier League in my eyes.
Oh well, in terms of the amount of time he's played, I mean that's got to be that's the bargain of all time, isn't it?
Oh, longevity. So that comes to the end of our 5-question quiz. I think it needs a little bit of work, this. However, there's a concept there. So Alan, thank you very much for being a part of it. Sam, well done. You've taken a 1-0 lead, and we'll go back to the actual questions now. So, Alan, moving on to more about your career personally. Everyone obviously has a completely different story about how they get into the media. It's not just a job application online or something you can really apply for in the paper. We want to hear yours. So how did you get in the media? How did you make your break?
Well, I was 10 years old when I wanted to be a football writer. I know that for a fact because I've got witnesses. The school teacher asked us all to go on stage one day before we left primary school and said, right, what do you want to be? Doctors and teachers, etc. And I said, I want to be a football writer. And she famously said, you'll not make any money at that. She's sadly not around, or I could have a conversation with her now. But when I was 16, I left school. I got what I thought was my ideal job with a magazine called Scottish Football Monthly, which was a tremendous publication. And I was thrilled to bits. And after a few weeks, I didn't know it was actually a freelance agency rather than a magazine. And after a few weeks, they sent me to cover my first football match at the age of 16. And they sent me a Partick Thistle game. And I honestly thought I'd died and gone to heaven. We won 4-0. I actually got the best line of the match reports because I knew something about our record against Arbroath. And it was a good line. So the next day, as it's in the paper, I'm published. Weekend after, can you do Thistle again? Oh, of course. Then the next week they said, can you do Airdrie? I said, Airdrie? What about Thistle? We're at home. No, we want you to do Airdrie. Oh my God. So I went home on a Wednesday night and I couldn't sleep. Went home on a Thursday night and I couldn't sleep. Friday morning I phoned my old headmaster. I said, can I come back to school? He said, what? He said, yeah. He said, but what's the point in that? He said, well, I'll upgrade a couple of my marks and I'll get university next year. And I said, well, if you want to, we'll see you on Monday. So I went into the office and says, look, I'm sorry, I'm not ready to be a football writer yet. I want to go back to school because basically I don't want to miss my team. And they're all going, what? This is your ideal job? What? I said, no, it was too soon. So 4 years later, I applied to several courses and I finally got on the Mirror Group course in Plymouth. And one of the main reasons I wanted the Mirror Group course was it was 500 miles away and I couldn't get back to see Thistle. I thought I've got to be a grown up now and go to work and not go rushing away and see my team on a Saturday. So that was that. So I started with the Mirror Group, 2 brilliant years there down in the West Country, fantastic training place down there. An awful lot of people have been on there. Alistair Campbell for one, oh dear. And from there I got a chance to go to the Daily Mirror in Manchester as a sub-editor, which was great, really good people to work with. But I didn't like working nights. So I went from there to Granada TV, who had some magnificent football programmes and sports programmes. And I was there for about 18 months, but I wanted to get back to newspapers. And by chance, I'd been doing a bit of work in the quiet for the Daily Mirror, as well as Granada. And the Sunday Mirror were opening an office in Scotland. They said, look, would you want to come up and cover Scotland for us? Well, yes, please. So that was 1983, and that was me in newspapers since then. And it was great. It was good. Covering Scotland for a newspaper when you're kind of that age and you're up and coming and you can basically do whatever you want because it was my paper. there was nobody else working for it. It was magic. It was tremendous. And ever since then, I've been in various papers attached to them, sometimes staff, sometimes contract, preferably freelance, I've got to say, because you can really, you can do what you please. And it's been great. I mean, it really has been great. And it has flown by. Some parts you remember more than others, but it's just absolutely flown by. And I still get enthusiastic for it. I don't quite love the game, as I've said, as much as I used to. But it beats working, that's for certain.
Do you remember, it's going back a little bit, but I always find it quite interesting, like what sparks an initial thought process like that? Like do you remember what the initial spark to wanting to be a journalist was? Because like it's quite a random one, especially as a 10-year-old as well.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Drumchapel, which is in a council flat in the worst council scheme in Britain. And everybody was a footballer. I think every street had a footballer who went on to play for a team. They were all fantastic. So I knew at a very young age, I'm not at this level, but I love football so much. And I used to get taken to games by my neighbour. And I was fortunate because he was a Celtic fan. I was indifferent at the time, about 8 or 9. And he took me to Celtic the night they won the first of their 9 titles in a row. And I was just, oh, wow, this is unbelievable. You know, this is something special. And as I say, Jimmy Johnson was playing, and if you didn't get excited by Jimmy Johnson, then basically you didn't have a pulse. What a player he was. And so I was absolutely hooked in football. I used to keep records and all the rest of it. And I knew I wouldn't play, so I thought, I want to write about this. And I don't have a set writer in mind who I admired at that time, but I just thought, I want to write about it. I want to be involved in football. I want to learn about football. I want to know what this is all about. I want to describe it. I want to be involved. And that was always the way. I mean, I was actually far better at arithmetic than I was at English. I think my folks wanted me to be an accountant, but to be fair to them, they just said, do what you want, carry on. I mean, it's funny, my dad was a printer in a newspaper, and 2 things he hated more than anything were journalists and football. So I don't know whether I was rebelling against him or not, but it was what I wanted to do. And as I say, even when I tried it, and I stuck my toe in the water briefly and I went back to university, you know, as soon as I could get involved, when I went to uni, I did the student newspaper, started as a columnist, and I was a sports editor, and then I was the editor. And when I was there as well, because of the facilities, I could bring out a fanzine for the team. It was one of the earliest fanzines. In fact, I have one here.
Wow.
Called the Jags Mag. And
That's beautiful.
I've got to tell you, it was as professional a fanzine at the time as you could imagine. It was unbelievably good. And getting involved in that, writing the stories, getting the adverts, taking it to the printers, even folding it, because we didn't have a professional folder, and then selling it and match day. It was brilliant. But I've got to tell you, the cooperation that we got from the club, or I got from the club, was just unreal. The chairman actually gave us money to do it, to launch, and the manager, all-time hero Bertie Auld, I once interviewed him in the bath. I go up to the ground, and his secretary says, "Oh, see you now, he's in his office." So I tap the door. "Come in, son." So I come in. What? He's sitting there in a big metal bath in the middle of his office, having a shave. He's having a bath. And I'm interviewing him for the next magazine. I don't know where to look. And wee Bertie was a character. And I kid you not, he was smoking a cigar in the bath. He said, "That's the story, son, that's the story." And you don't know whether to laugh or you just don't know what to do. It's a fantastic material out of him. You just don't get that. And I've got to say, I am not really missing the days of interviewing managers in the bath. That's something I'm glad I only did once.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. Again, that kind of, I know we keep coming back to it, but it's a case of how different things are now and how different the relationships are. Because can you imagine walking in and seeing Pep Guardiola in a bath?
Not a chance.
No.
I don't know if I should tell this. There is a Fergie story as well. There is a Fergie story as well. When he was at Aberdeen, I'd gone back down to England, and I'd been quite close with Fergie at Aberdeen. He hadn't banned me yet. Oh no, he had. Sorry, he banned me the first week, but we got over it. But I went down. I took him to a game to watch a player down in England, and it was the same then. I picked him up at the hotel airport in Manchester to take him to watch Stuart McCall, which wasn't a bad recommendation. And Fergie's there. Just jumped out the shower. Oh, come in, son. Come in the shower. Oh, well, keep it to yourself, please. And then took him to the game. It was just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. You don't have that.
Brilliant.
But as I say, the stories behind the stories are the ones that make me chuckle. I mean, there's the story there, which is just about my all-time favourite crazy story, the one behind my shoulder about Diego Forlan. I'd played a little bit of a part in that move happening, and I knew that the agent involved was trying to take him to Manchester United, was up against it because another agent had brought Middlesbrough in with the player to sign for Middlesbrough, and they were landing at Gatwick Airport. So all the papers in the morning had Middlesbrough swoop for Forlan, blah, blah, blah. The Daily Mirror, bless them, who I was with at the time, I said, look, no, Man United will intercept him at the airport. So what? I said, I'm telling you, Manchester United will intercept him at the airport. So they ran the Man U story. Everybody else has got Middlesbrough, I've got Man United. And I spoke to the paper the next morning, and I can tell they're tense. Are you sure about this? Yes. Are you sure? So by chance, this was early days of Sky Sports News, and the cameras are at the airport. And there's Steve McLaren, Keith Lamb from Middlesbrough, and there's Diego Forlan behind them. And I'm just sitting waiting. And then the big agent walks in, grabs Forlan behind him, marches him off, and takes him over to Man United. And Middlesbrough standing about, what's happened there? Where's Diego? He's gone. So all of a sudden, from possibly putting my whole job at risk, I'm getting garlands sent to me because Forlan's gone to Man United instead. There's an even funnier story behind how I knew that, but I've got to keep that way off the record. But the joy of seeing him being intercepted live on Sky, because Sky didn't know what was happening. They didn't know this guy had grabbed him and taken him away for a car to speed him from Gatwick up to Manchester to sign for Fergie that night. So nobody knew what was happening. And I'm sitting there, as you can imagine, I was rather enjoying that moment.
Yeah, I'm sure you felt quite a lot of pride at that point.
Oh, that was great. That was great. I was up there with, as I say, probably the proudest is when Stuart McCall scored for Scotland against Sweden in the World Cup '99. I don't think anything will beat that in terms of job satisfaction when he actually scored that night and we won. I think it's, to be fair, it's the last time Scotland won a World Cup match, 1990. Yeah, how's that for national shame? But I remember when he scored, I was watching it with all my mates and I was jumping about crazy, and I was the only one that wasn't, because I thought, is that Stuart? Because it was such a mess at the time, and we'd scored. Nobody cared who'd scored that, and I thought, is that Stuart? And yeah, they showed the replay and Stuart had scored. And I mean, honestly, I was as proud as I've probably ever been in football when that went in, because I'd been behind approaching him and pushing his case and getting him in the Scotland team, all due to a letter from his dad to Jock Stein. And I used to do Jock's column, and Jock gave me the letter and said, do you know this lad? I said, no. I said, well, could you go and watch him? And if you like him, could you talk to him for us? I thought, Jock Stein's asking me to go and approach a player for Scotland. Went to see him. Terrific player. Pulled him after the game, and Stuart's looking at me. Who are you? You know, what? You want me to play for Scotland? I said, yeah. I told him the whole story. Okay. Say, look, I'll give you my number, you give us my, and we'll speak, and I'll tell you what Jock Stein sent you next week. And he's looking at me, and he must be thinking, this is a different class of autograph hunter we've got here. So I phoned him up the next week, and to be fair, he was brilliant. He said, I didn't know anything about it at the time. I said, I know. I said, but you will be picked by Scotland for the next game. And then, you're far too young to remember this, but he was also picked by England that morning. So both countries picked him, and he picked England ahead of Scotland. And the trouble that caused, you couldn't believe. But eventually, 6 years later, he got on the Scotland team. And I'd been chipping away. Jock died, and other managers came in, and the other man, Craig Brown and Andy Roxburgh. And Roxburgh eventually picked him. And as I say, the rest is history. But that is easily that and probably Burnley winning promotion to the Premier League under Owen Coyle would probably be the highlights, I would say. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. You've kind of already alluded to it in the fact that you didn't have one when you first got that spark to be a journalist.
Yes.
But is there anyone who you've always kind of looked up to or inspired to be like whilst going through your career?
Yeah, you'll never have heard of the guy. But there's a fella called Ian McChesney who worked for a very, very small newspaper in Glasgow called the West End News. And he used to do, because Thistle are this bohemian, probably the best one to use, team in Glasgow. We are the football alternative. We don't have a religion or anything like that. We probably shouldn't even be there these days, but we are. And if you choose to be a Thistle fan, then you're a little bit of an individual. And McChesney wrote for the paper as a fan. And his reports were some of the funniest things you've ever read. They were genius, absolute genius. If you can find them anywhere obscure, read Ian McChesney's match reports. And it always taught me that try and get a little bit of humour into your report if you possibly can. You can never copy McChesney; it was a one-off. But I just thought, well, if you're strong enough with your newspaper where you can write a little bit of how you want to write, then that's great. In terms of actual writing or the basics of it, there's a guy, a fellow you won't even know. He's called Harley Lawler, who was in Plymouth on the Sunday paper, and I was working under him when I started, and he was just unbelievable. He knew all the right people, he knew the story, and he knew, because I was a super enthusiast, that we were in the same wavelength. And he just taught me a couple of basic things, and I've always used them. And that is, if you're doing a match report, if possible, personalise the start of it, make it about a player rather than about a team if you can possibly help it, and then expand the story from there. I said, why is that? He said, well, it's anybody could write the score down and tell you who's won the game. You need to tell them a little bit about the reason behind it and who the key player is, and make it more interesting that way. And I always had this thought in my head, well, I'm in a privileged position. If you're in the press box, you've got access that the fans at the game don't have access to. So you're there on their behalf. You've got to try and find out something they would want to know. Now, quite often you get obstructed in that down the years, even more so now than ever. But you've got that access. So that was always a key thing in my head. Personalise it and tell it. So if I've been at that game as a fan and I buy the paper the next day, I want to know something I didn't know before I bought the paper. I don't want to read something that I've already seen. I want to know something. Why did that happen? What did the manager say about that? Otherwise, there's no point in the newspaper. And that's always been my philosophy as well. You've got to tell people something, and otherwise, you're not. What are you charging them £1 for to read if you're not going to tell them something they don't know? It's just a waste of time. So that was the basic, and a lot of that came from Harley. Harley was very down to earth, Cornishman, a bit crabby. Not many people got on with him, but I got on with him great. And that was his attitude was.
You touched on.
Tell them something they don't know. That's your job.
You touched on it there, but my last question was: do you have any overarching advice for people trying to get into the journalistic job or anything like that? Like, that you could give to me and Matt as well as anyone listening?
Yeah, it's harder now, I would think, breaking in than it's ever been, because there's less places to go. There's less newspapers, and who knows how long newspapers in their current form are going to last. However, there will always, and social media has proved this, there'll always be a market for people who can find out something that people want to know. There's always a market for information. And the great thing about social media is that you can find out who actually broke the story. It's easy to do. And if you've got it wrong, you'll get kicked, quite rightly. So that has always got to be, your goal has got to be, make sure you get the story, make sure you get it first, make sure you get it right, make sure you know it's right before you do it. So if I was starting now, I would say, attach yourself to a local newspaper somewhere. Unfortunately, you probably have to do it for nothing. And go to games. I don't mean the big games, go to little games, go to youth games, go to reserve games. Find out the players coming through. Sit in the stand, talk to the parents, talk to the agents, talk to club officials, make yourself known to them that you're as daft as they are to go to these games. And they'll say, wait a minute, he's all right, you might be able to do something for us. And that'd be the way to do it. I mean, we can all do courses. We can all, maybe do little internships here, there, and everywhere. But you've got to have the basic, and the basic is information. And to get that information and to be a person who's got it above others is basically what's going to set you apart. And that means go to crazy games. You'll find out the youth team, find out who the best player is, and find out what the story is with them. Are they going to come through? Are they going to go somewhere else? Who do they know? And get to know them and find ways to help them in some way. Can I write a story about you for a local paper? Blah, 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 your background, etc., etc. Do a feature on them. Get to know them. And the player that you might meet at 15 or 16 might be the guy you rely on at 5 or 40 who's become a coach. And that's a 20-year relationship you've then built up. But as I say, but when you get it, don't abuse it. Help them. Don't let them down. And just listen to everything else. If you treat them right, you'll get it back. I still believe that is a basic thing. If you try and do somebody in, they'll do you back. That's the way of life. But if you go and get that 15, 16-year-old and he moves with £10 million at 18 and he tells you first, it's all been worth it, hasn't it? That's the way I'd travel. I couldn't tell you now what the best training course is. I couldn't tell you what degree to do. I couldn't promise you what media outlet's going to be available in 2 or 3 years, because that's a bit of an unknown. But what I would say is, no matter what outlets there are, if you've got the story, you'll make yourself known and you'll go from nothing to something in a pretty quick amount of time. And I've got to say, I hear a lot of people who bleated about, we never get the chance, all the rest of it. Well, I would go to the daftest games going for 30 years. And quite often I'd be the only one there because nobody else would bother. You've got to put yourself out. You've got to go to an obscure game. And you'll find if you go to these games and you sit amongst people, they'll talk to you. You find that he's a scout. Go and say hello. Oh, blah, 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 blah. And you'll start trading information. Or you'll see a club official who are often busy, but they'll also, if you take interest in them, they'll take interest in you because they want people to like them. So you get close to them and you start to build a little network up. And it takes time, but it's worth it in the end. And that to me is the way to travel. And who knows where it might take you. If you go on particularly well with a young player, you might end up being his representative. I mean, I can think of dozens who've said to me, would you want to be my agent? I'm not an agent, I'm a journalist. But somebody else might have the attitude, okay, I want to be an agent. And it would only take 2 or 3 players for you to become a very good agent, making a lot of very good money. So my advice to anybody who's mad on football is stay mad on football and work it. Go anywhere and everywhere and pick up friends, pick up contacts, pick up acquaintances and get to know it that way. You won't beat that method.
Brilliant.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. That's really useful for us. I'm sure that's going to be useful for other students as well.
I just hope there's papers about. I mean, I've got real worries about that because I think we're in the end game for newspapers. But it doesn't matter because people will always look for it. I mean, I never asked them to follow me on Twitter. Next thing I know, I've got 134,000 followers.
Just drop that one in there quickly.
I only went on that to talk to my daughter, and that's the truth. She was in America, and I thought, this is cheap. Next thing I know, there's 134,000 people playing from you. But it's football, so don't knock it. Don't knock it.
It's brilliant.
Anyway, guys, I wish you the best. And if there's anything else I can do for you, just let me know, all right?
Will do. Thank you very much. That very nicely brings us to the end of our little recording here. So, Alan, thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Your stories have been the best we've had.
Anytime, Paul. Anytime.
It's been brilliant. So, thank you ever so much.